How's it all going? This is part 2 of 4 of Genesis Bible study. Please save these and go through them amongst the time you're reading it. Like, for instance, Genesis 8, by the time you get to the reason why he brings out a raven, then you can watch the reasoning why I explained why a raven was used as the first bird, just to go back and forth. But this one's going to be 26 through 50 to finish off the 50 chapters. And then the next one will be people, places, and terms, and a few maps to show you, and then a couple of the ancient civilizations that they talk about a lot in this time to kind of explain a background of them and pictures of some of their ancient civilization things they had did. But anyways, God bless you all, and let's start with Genesis chapter 26. By this time there was a famine in the land now, first since Abraham's days. This is the first famine they had had since then. Uh, Isaac goes to the king of Gerar. The Lord appears to Isaac and says, "Do not go to Egypt. Stay here for a while, and I will bless you." He tells him he will give him the same oath that he gave his father Abraham. So Isaac tells the men the same thing Abraham did, that his wife was his sister, because he was afraid that they would kill him for her beauty. So upon this, the king learned of this and was mad. But he let him stay here for a bit, and Isaac was blessed. Was blessed on the crops that year. They had an abundance of crops. Once the king learned of this, he told Isaac, "You're too powerful for us," and sent him away. Probably because he had felt the presence of the Lord and was scared, like many people are in today's society. When you get to talking about the Lord with them, they have a fear that comes upon them that they just don't like hearing anything to do about this. But anyways, to continue, so upon living in the valley and reopening the wells that Isaac did, Isaac was still catching the attention of the king. So the king came back to him and told him, "We can tell that the Lord is with you." So they dug a well and they named it um, Shabbat, which means an oath or seven in Hebrew. Esau by this time was 40 and married Judith, daughter of uh, Beri, from the Hittites. Reason why I'm going to describe the Hittites. And also Basemath, daughter of Elon the Hittite, which there's a belief that her name also was something else, but I'm not going to get into that. Um, but anyways, it takes us to Genesis chapter 27. When Isaac was old, he lost his sight. He called for Esau. He told him to go hunting and to cook him something, and he will bless him. Rebecca was listening in on the conversation. Remember, she was more fond of Jacob than Esau. While she was listening in on the conversation, she tells Jacob to trick his father into blessing him instead. Remember, in the beginning, he got his brother to give him his birthright. Now his mother's telling him to trick him to steal his father's blessing. So Jacob was worried because his brother was a hairy man and he was not. And his mother said, "Let the curse fall on me instead of you if he notices this." So upon this, he steals the blessing of his brother, and his father blessed him instead, not knowing. Because remember, said he was blind. Once Esau learned he was not the one who got blessed, he was jealous. He wanted the blessing, he begged for it, but his father told him, "I am done. I have done made him Lord over you." Jacob then flees to Laban, if I said it right. I think it's Laban. He flees there upon Esau learning upon this, worried that the jealousy was going to cause strife between them. Then it takes us to Genesis 28, where Jacob was told by his father not to marry a Canaanite woman, but instead to go to your mother's father, Bethuel, and take a wife from among the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. You see the interracial family thing. Jacob has a dream from the Lord. He tells him his descendants will be blessed like Abraham was. So upon waking up, he makes a pillar and calls it Bethel, meaning the house of God. And then it takes us to Genesis chapter 29, where Jacob arrives at his mother's brother's town. Upon arrival, he's seen Rachel, daughter of Laban. He immediately wept over her and kissed her. Laban learned of this and went to Jacob. Laban had two daughters, Leah and Rachel. Leah was the older one and had weak eyes, and Rachel was the younger sister and was lovely in form and beautiful, is how the Bible describes. Jacob was in love with Rachel. He agrees to work for Laban in return to marry his young daughter, but Laban tricks Jacob. Ironically, he gets tricked back after being tricked into sleeping with Leah instead of Rachel because it is custom for the older daughter to marry before the younger. So he lays with both in the long run and marries both and had children with them. Now, Genesis 30, I couldn't imagine, before I go to that, two sisters married to the same man. I just couldn't imagine that. But Genesis 30, by this point, Jacob was still working for his father in law, and Rachel was getting jealous over Leah, for she did not have children with him yet. Jacob, through all this, was to lay with maidservants and have children, since she couldn't. But this only made things worse, which I imagine it did, because the love they had for each other continued to have children and lay with other women. Finally, God gives her a child, and she names him Joseph. Jacob asks Laban if he could return to his family with his wives and kids. He agrees if he will help with the flocks, so Jacob increases the flocks without cheating Laban out of any, is what the Bible tells us. Then it takes us to Genesis 31, where Jacob hears of Laban's sons coming for him after he had done left. So he flees with his wife and kids. They are accusing him of taking everything that their father had. Jacob told his family that they were leaving. He tells them, "You know your father has cheated me out of changing my wages over 10 times through all these times." If you take a picture and read this, Jacob really for years does everything this man wants and still doesn't get anything he's asking for. So this is why he left. So Laban then came to the town Jacob fled to, and the Lord told him, "Do not harm Jacob. Anything you say, good or bad, better to say nothing at all," which a lot of us should do that in life. So later they made a covenant together and they went their ways, which was probably better than doing anything. But like the Lord told him, no matter good or bad, whatever you say would be bad. Just don't even talk to him at all. But of course he does. Genesis 32 is where it takes us next, where Jacob prepares to meet Esau. It had been a while since this moment. He's sending this message in hopes that it will see favor in his eyes. His brother agrees to meet him and is on his way with 400 men. So I imagine when he hears this, like he does, he panics. So as he hears of this, he splits the groups into two in case his brother is coming to attack him. He prays to God, hoping that his brother doesn't kill him and his family. Even though God told him he would be safe with the covenant they made, he tells the group of servants in front of him with the animals to tell his brother, "These are yours, and your brother is behind us." Jacob wrestled with a man who, upon touching his hip, basically, he's walking and he comes across a man and they kind of get into a little tussle, is what the Bible tells us, that his hip gets like wrenched into a way that he might be limping by this point. So once he asks the man his name, the man says, "Why don't you ask me my name?" Once he asks the man his name, the man says, "Why do you ask me my name?" Sorry. Then he turns and blessed him. He tells him that his name is now Israel instead of Jacob, because you will have a struggle with God. So the place where this happens, he named if I say it right, Peniel, I think Peniel, which in Hebrew means the face of God. So basically, he thinks he came across God at this moment. It sounds like he did because he tells him that his name would be changed to Israel and it stays Israel for the rest of the time. So he said he saw the face of God, and the Israelites don't eat tendons attached to the hip because God touched Jacob's hip. There's the whole reasoning behind that little, I guess you could almost call it a parable, like one of the first parables, but it didn't come from Jesus himself. It came from that part that, is the reason why we don't eat tendons. Then it takes us to Genesis 33. Not much to really sum up this one. There's a few chapters that are like that through every book of the Bible. But Jacob sees his brother Esau. He came with 400 men, and he started to run toward him. He hugged him and kissed Jacob. So I'm pretty sure that this sees all these men. He's wondering why my brother's hugging and kiss me. But at the same point, think from Esau's side, he hasn't seen Jacob in a while, so maybe he brought these men because he thought maybe his brother would hold a grudge, knowing that he was jealous of him. So upon this, Jacob bowed to him, and so did his wives and kids. After talking to one another, he went to the city of Shechem in Canaan and camped. He made an altar there, and they named it El Eloah Israel, meaning God, the God of Israel, or mighty is the God of Israel. If I said that right, some of these Hebrew words are so complex, and I thought our English vocabulary was complex, but some of this is even more complex. But it takes us now to Genesis 34. We're getting there. Diane, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, she went out to see the women of the land, and a man by the name of Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, basically. When he saw Diane, he immediately fell in love, he thought. Really, it was probably more of lust than love, by the way it describes later on. So he laid with her and defiled her, which defiled back then pretty much mean he raped her. He pretty much just took advantage of her and did whatever. So Hamor learned of this and went to Jacob to ask for marriage between his daughter and his son. And in return, they can trade daughters off for marriage. But Jacob said, no, none of you are circumcised. Because remember, the Abraham was told by God that the ark of the circumcision was an important thing. So unless all of you get this done, the answer is no, is pretty much what he tells him. So they did, but later that day, two of Jacob's sons, Simon and Levi, who later on are told of their ways by Jacob on his deathbed of how these two kids will be, and it kind of reasoning why in chapter 49, I think it could go back to 34, is because the way he describes them, that they are brutal people, and this right here will show it. They went with their swords and killed all the men of the town. Jacob was mad, saying, now these men will surely kill me and my household. So then that's where it takes us to Genesis 35, which can be a little bit of a longer chapter, but God tells Jacob to go to Bethel and to make an altar to God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother. So Jacob told his household to put away all foreign gods and purify yourselves. Because by this point, it seemed like the way he was talking, a lot of them had false idol god statues with them, which is why I'm going to explain the ancient civilization, because you'll see there's a lot of ancient god statues that they really worshipped back then, especially the Hittites. But anyways, to purify yourselves. So they gave Jacob all the gods and earrings that they had, and he hid them. So God had a terror fall upon them so that they don't pursue Jacob. So now he's got the town scared of them so they don't pursue him. This is where he is continuing his promise to Jacob that he will keep a covenant with him by keeping him safe. So he built an altar and named it El Bethel, is what he named it. Then Deborah, which is Rebekah's nurse, she had died around this time, so they buried her under the oak tree in Bethel, and they named that the Alan Bakuth, which God then blessed Jacob again and says, "Your name is Jacob no more," like he told him before. It is Israel. He tells him once again, "Your name is Israel." God told him, "I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations will come from you, and kings shall come from you too." Then he gives him the land that he gave to Abraham and Isaac. And give it to his offspring too, is what he tells him. Rachel died in childbirth um, by this point, and she named her son Ben Oni, which his father later in return changed his name from that to Benjamin. Um, she was buried in the Ephrath, which is basically Bethlehem, is where she was buried at, which there's a lot of symbolization with the name Rachel through other Bible verses. Um, Later on, get to that, but there's a lot of meaning why she was buried in Bethlehem, but it doesn't pertain to Genesis. Then Reuben laid with Bilhan, his father's concubine, which concubines are pretty much, they were a servant given as someone to lay with, basically. Um, just weird time, I guess, just somebody they could lay in bed with. But Israel, aka Jacob, had heard of this. Upon meeting his father Isaac in Mamre or Hebron, he was 180 years old and died. By this point, Isaac finally had died. He lived 180 years, and Jacob and Esau buried him. So then it takes us to Genesis 36, and I'm not going to get into much of this like a couple other chapters because it is a breakdown of the generations of Esau. It goes more along the lines of Esau took his wives, sons, and daughters out of the land of Canaan away from his brother Jacob, along with all his livestock. He settled in the hill country of Seir. This chapter gives a breakdown of chief by chief, king by king, before any king ruled over Israel, pretty much. So then it takes us to chapter 37, where Joseph's brothers were jealous of him because his father loved him more. This tended to happen a lot in this family bloodline where a mother or father loved one of the children more, and probably why it happens in today's society too. But they couldn't even talk peacefully to him, basically, is what the Bible tells us. Joseph had a dream and told his brothers, and they hated him more because of this dream. Instead of really embracing the dream he had, they were angry over his testimony, and he told them that um, he say the sun, the moon, and 11 stars all bowed before him. His father said, "So I am to tell myself and your mother and brothers to bow to you." His father kept this in mind, and his brothers hated him even more. Ironically, you're going to find out later on, as I'm explaining all this, why he had this dream. So his brothers were tending to their father's flock, and Israel seen this and said, "Joseph, go help them in Shechem." He couldn't find them there, so a man seen him wandering around and said they went to Dothan, another country. They planned to kill him, but Reuben said, "No, let's just put him in a pit." His brothers seen some Ishmaelites, and they sold him to them, basically. And then those people sold him to Potpir, an officer of the Pharaoh in Egypt, while this Jacob, aka Israel, whichever one you want to call him, he's back and forth, wept over Joseph's death for days because his sons had told him that Joseph was killed. They brought him a garment with blood all over it. So, he was tricked and thought that his son was dead. It wasn't. This is probably the last of the longest chapters we have in Genesis, and it's Genesis 38. The chapter starts talking about Judah, who's seen a Canaanite woman whose name was Shua, he took her and had a son named Then she bore another son named Onan, and then yet again another son uh, was born, and his name was Shelah. Then Judah took a wife from his oldest son and her name was Tamara, and but he was wicked, but he was wicked in the eyes of the Lord, and he put him to death. So basically, the Lord thought he was wicked, so he put him to death. And then Judah said to Onan, "Take your brother's wife and raise offspring for him." So by this point, he's like passing his brother's wife back and forth, or his kid's wife back and forth between the brothers, and tells him to raise offspring for him. So because of this, Onan would do basically a pull-out method, is what the Bible would tell us. Let's just lamer terms, a pull-out method, and would waste it on the ground so he would not give her offspring. But because of him doing this, disobeying his father, even though it wasn't right to take this woman, the Lord seen wickedness in him because of this and also put him to death. So Judah said to Tamara, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up." Basically, his youngest son. Then Judah's wife, um, Shua, daughter, dies by this point. Upon this, he went to Timnah, his sheep shearer, and his friend Hira. Then someone told Tamara her father-in-law was heading there. So she took off her widow garments, because they wore widow garments back then, and put a veil on and wrapped up. When Judith seen her and thought she was a prostitute, because this, I guess, with a veil on the face, standing out in the streets meant you were a prostitute back then. So he said, "Let me come in you." Um, Is basically that's exactly how the Bible puts it. Let me come in you. This is how they talked back then. So she said, "What will you give me so you can come in me?" Is what she says. He said, "I will give you a young goat." She said, "If you give me a pledge till, or if you give me a pledge till you send it, then I will." He said, "What pledge should you have?" She said, "Your signet, your cord, and your staff." Later, he sent the goat to be taken to her to get the pledge back, but no one could find her because remember, she was going under disguise. So he asked around for the prostitute, but no one knew who he was talking about. So later, they figured out what had happened, and she gave birth to twins, Prez and Zerah. So basically, he'd found out that he was trying to get this lady to stay around for his youngest son, and he ended up having relations with her and children. So then it takes us to Genesis 39. To summarize this chapter, Joseph had a favor with the Lord, so his master made him in charge of everything he had. So he never worried about anything but what to eat. Joseph was what they called a good looking man in the Bible, and his master's wife seen this. So every day she tried to get with him and to have him lay in bed with her. He didn't, but one day she grabbed him by the garment and said, "Lay with me." He took off running. So then she yelled for the men and said that the Hebrew tried to lay with me, and he left his garments. So then she tells her husband the same story, and of course the Pharaoh gets mad. He threw him into a prison. The prison guards seen that the Lord was with him, so he made him in charge and didn't pay attention to anything Joseph did while locked up. He left him in charge of everything because the Lord was with him, is what you find out in this chapter. So then it takes us to chapter 40, Genesis 40, where sometime later the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker commit an offense against the Lord, and the Pharaoh heard and put them in the prison with Joseph. The two had dreams, each of their own, is what the Bible tells us, and each with their own interpretation. When Joseph Seeing the cupbearer was down, he told him about this dream when he asked him, "Why are you so down?" So as he tells him about the dream, he says that there was a vine, and when it blossomed, it shot forth. Clusters ripened into grapes. He said that the Pharaoh's cup was in his hand, and he pressed the grapes into the cup. Joseph told him that the dream meant in 3 days Pharaoh will let you out, and you should tell him of me. The chief bakers seen this and said, I had a dream also. There was 3 baskets on my head, filled with baked foods for the Pharaoh. The birds kept eating them. Joseph said that your dream basically means in 3 days that the Pharaoh will hang you on a tree and the birds will eat the flesh off of you. And he will restore the cupbearer's job and he will forget Joseph. Then it takes us to Genesis 41. So by this point, 2 years now has passed, and the Pharaoh dreamed a dream that troubled him a lot. He had a dream of 7 plump, healthy cows and 7 ugly, skinny cows. The skinny ones ate the plump ones till they were no more. Then he awoke and fell asleep again and had a second dream. This time he dreamed of a healthy stalk with 7 fat ears and one stalk with 7 withered, skinny ears. The skinny ones ate the fat ones, much like the first dream. So he asked all the magicians and wise men in Egypt to answer this dream, but none of them could interpret it. By this point, the cupbearer, who was in jail from the Pharaoh, told him of Joseph and the dreams they had, and how he was redeemed by the Pharaoh and the other was hung. So the Pharaoh called for Joseph and he told him of this dream. And basically, Joseph had told him, you will have 7 good years and 7 famine years, is what the dream meant. So he had a good idea that they should store a fifth of all the harvest in the storehouses during the 7 good years to be ready for the 7 bad ones. So the Pharaoh put Joseph in charge instead of prison. He took him out, now put him in charge of this, and gave him a wife, and people bowed to him and called his name out. He had 2 sons by this point, and then it takes us to Genesis 42, where Jacob or Israel learned that the grain was for sale in Egypt. So he told his sons about it, and they told some of them to go and buy some, for the famine was great upon the land. So all but Benjamin went. Joseph was the governor of the land at this time, and his brothers came before him and bowed to him, but they did not recognize him because the Pharaoh had made him clean up his appearance, get a haircut, and all that. But Joseph called them spies, and he said, if you are truly honest men, then leave one brother and return home with the grain, and I will return your brother if you bring me the youngest brother. At this time, Reuben told them all, did I say, but I did not say not to sin against the boy. Is basically what Reuben was telling them in return. Didn't I tell you guys not to sin against the boy, aka Joseph, even though they didn't know it was him, because he thought that now this was their punishment. But since none of you listened, we have blood on our hands now, is what Reuben tells them. Upon opening their sacks, they had fear on them, as they not only had the grain, but they seen all the money was still in there. So Jacob, of course, distressed, says, you've already taken Joseph, now Simon, and now you want Benjamin too. He's basically talking to the Lord by this point. So then it takes us to Genesis 43, while they're going through all this debacle. The famine was getting even more severe by this point, and Jacob's family ran out of grain to eat, so he told his sons to go buy more. Judith, one of Jacob's sons, said, we will not go unless we take our brother, for he said we will not see his face unless you bring him to me. He goes on to tell his dad that he will bring him back, and if he don't, then it is my blame. But we could have returned twice now if we wouldn't have delayed. So Jacob sends them off with Benjamin, even though he didn't want to, and some choice fruits, and the money he gave back, and double the money. A little balm, honey, gum, myrrh, and pistachio nuts and almonds were also among this. So upon standing before Joseph, Joseph saw Benjamin and said, is this your brother? How's your father? Is he well? Starts asking a bunch of questions. They answered both questions. Later, before they ate, Joseph was pleased to see his brothers. His heart got a overwhelming warmth from it, so he left the room and he wept for a bit. After weeping, he washed his face and came out to his brothers, and Benjamin had 5 times as much to eat as anybody else. Then it takes us to Genesis 44. Then Joseph asked to fill their bags with grain and put the money in the mouth of the sack, and my silver cup in the youngest one's sack, along with grain and money. And they were sent on their way. Upon leaving, Joseph sent some towards them and said, "Who did this evil upon our Lord?" They said, "Open the sacks." They noticed that Benjamin had a silver cup and brought them to Joseph. He said, "Explain yourself." And by this point, they told him everything they told their father before leaving. "Remember, I'll return my brother or I'll take the blame for the rest of my life." So they started to plead for their case to go back to their father by this point, where it takes us to Genesis 45. So Joseph couldn't help himself. He sent everyone out but his brothers. He wept so loud that the people outside his home and Pharaoh's home heard his weeping. He told his brothers, "I am Joseph, your brother, you sold. But the Lord sent me here before you to help for this famine, which there is still 5 years left. So tell our father to come here with all of you so that you don't starve." Then the Pharaoh heard of this and told them to get their father, and he will make them rich here. He sent them to their father with 10 male donkeys loaded with good things, 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and provisions for their journeys. And Joseph sent Benjamin with 5 changes of clothes and 300 shekels of silver. Upon arrival, Jacob couldn't believe it, so he started his journey to Joseph before his death, which gets us to Genesis 46, where Jacob is on his journey, stopped to offer sacrifices to God of his father Isaac. God came to him in a dream and told him, "I am going to Egypt with you and making you a great nation." So all of that went with Jacob to Egypt was 66 people, and Joseph's family that he had there made it 70 in all total. When Joseph seen his father, he wept on him for a good while. Shows he missed him, which I bet had been a while. So Joseph tells his father when the Pharaoh asks, "What's your job?" say, "Your servants have been keepers of livestock for our youth until even now." So it's what he told him to describe. So then it takes us to Genesis 47, where Joseph went in to the Pharaoh and told him, "These are my father and my brothers." And from his brother he took 5 men to the Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked their their jobs. They said that we are servants. They said your servants are shepherds, pretty much. That's what they told him. He told them that they can have the best of the land, and if any of them are able men, they can tend to his flock. Then Joseph took his father in front of the Pharaoh, and he asked how old he is. Jacob then blessed the Pharaoh and went out. Joseph then got his family settled in and gave them enough food for the amount of people. So by this point, the famine was bad. So the people were out of food. They came to Joseph, and so he gathered all the money that they had and gave it to the Pharaoh for food. Then again, they ran out. So they came to Joseph and said, and gave their livestock to the Pharaoh in return so they can have food. Then they ran out again, but this time they came to him saying, "We have nothing left, so buy us and our land." So he did, and they became servants to the Pharaoh. And Pharaoh would get a fifth of all the food, and they keep 4/5. Then Jacob came to Joseph and asked, when he dies, if we can bury him with his family, not in Egypt, is what he asked. Okay, had to get up real quick. So to finish this off, and we were down to the last few chapters. Genesis 48, So this chapter basically is before Jacob dies. He talks with Joseph and learns that he has two sons that he didn't know of before, and he blessed them. But Joseph was displeased with the right hand of his father not being on the oldest one for the blessing. But Jacob knew this and told Joseph, they both will be great, but the younger one will be greater. Before Jacob dies, he tells Joseph of God's plan that he will be with him and bring him back to the land of his father. Jacob tells him that he has given him a mountain slope that he took from the hands of the Amorites with his sword. So then it takes us to Genesis 49, and there's not much I can really say about this chapter, but this chapter, Jacob knows he's about to die, so he gathers his sons around him to bless them. He tells all 12 of them what will happen to them in a way suitable to them. These are the 12 tribes of Israel. Then before he dies, he says, take me to the cave which Abraham bought from the Hittites and bury me there. He breathed his last breath and then he died. And then it takes us to Genesis 50. So Joseph wept over his father by this point. They embalmed him, which took 40 days. So Joseph asked the Pharaoh if he could take his father to the burial place, and I will return afterwards. The Pharaoh sends him on his way, and he took his servants, his household, and his father's household, and all of them, but the little ones and the livestock, and set off. After returning, his brothers worried that he would kill them now, but he reassures them in Genesis 50, verse 20, that he would not. So Joseph told them after he dies, they will go to the land that was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He then died. He was 110 years old, and they put him in a coffin in Egypt. And that is where the end of Joseph's life was, and where it ends our beautiful 50 chapters of Genesis. Now, part 3 will be not too long. It will be some explanations of some of the terms that are brought up in there. Then, part 4 will be the ancient civilizations. I will have these all recorded and done today so they can get out by next week. I can get back to my sermons and start studying Exodus. I thank you guys, and may you have a blessed day. And I'm going to have something pop up on the screen for you guys. God bless.